I'm Sandja Brügmann, founder of the Passion Institute. This is Passion Talk TV, and today I have a very special guest with me. It's co-founder of WhiteWave and GoodBelly, Steve Demos. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
So, Right Livelihood is at the foundation of the way you do business. Could you share some of the principles around Right Livelihood with us?
Well, first I'll talk about why there's a value in right livelihood is differentiated from what I'll call opportunistic livelihood. Our responsibility for making a living on the planet is very obvious. We all have the moral obligation to take care of ourselves, give back, steward the land, etc. Unfortunately, capitalism, opportunistic capitalism, doesn't it doesn't encompass all aspects of an emotional state, let alone a livelihood state. If it's legal and if you're so inclined, then you can go forward and make a living, make a lot of money, and then you end up, or many seem to end up in a place of question. What's missing? Why am I not totally fulfilled? What is it that, what element did I miss? I thought I did it right. In fact, by definition of American or Western European capitalism, it was done properly. But there is an element in my observation that was missing, and that is a personal belief or morality of what you individually believe in and brings value to your existence. So right livelihood is effectively the including of personal belief and personal conviction of something that is the world is better off, it is virtuous, it's positive. So right livelihood can be summed up very simply as a good for me, good for you, good for everything that touches. And if you can find a livelihood, no matter whether it's a service, a product, a profession, that meets those definitions, that's contributing to society, then it meets my definition of right living or right livelihood.
And where did you come about? How did you learn about right livelihood and the principles around it?
Well, I'm a product of an entrepreneurial family, and I sort of graduated into life in the late 60s. And at that time, business was the pariah of society. It was viewed as exploitive. It was viewed as greedy. It was viewed as corrupt and destructive to the environment, destructive to employees and things like that. Some say business hasn't changed. For me, I graduated from college 1970, and I had all the DNA of a capitalist, but I had this huge conflict of capitalism as we understood it versus the corruptness that it was being viewed with. I decided to drop out, and for the next 4 years, on and off, I wandered around India primarily, having hitchhiked overland from Europe. I traveled through a lot of the Mideast and went up into Nepal. And during this time period, I literally had bought a one-way ticket, had no intentions of returning or knowing when I would. And I began studying Eastern philosophy, what we know as yoga, meditation, and everything that encompasses. I ended up on what I called the Guru Trail, and I met a lot of individuals at that time who they were spiritually evolved and it hadn't been transferred to the United States yet. So I crawled into a cave, literally, in the upper hills of the Himalayas, and I started studying and practicing for an extended period of time. And during that time period in the Buddhist suttas, I came across a descriptor by the Buddha of what right livelihood was and how a layperson should conduct themselves in the world of commerce. I was in the forest one day foraging for firewood, and I came across a couple pilgrims, and they mistaken me for an aesthetic, a renunciate, and they were doing what's called danda pranam, or full face down in the dirt, touching my feet, and I'm grabbing them by their shoulders and picking them up, and it was like a lightning bolt that hit me that I was not living a true existence. I was living something that I wanted, but it wasn't really what I was called to do for myself. And at that time, I committed myself to put into action, prove to myself that there was a higher order of business in the world, and that I was going to demonstrate that the principles of right livelihood were more powerful than the principles of opportunistic capitalism. You can translate that to, I would outprofit the profiteers. And my premise was that if I could demonstrate that virtue was more profitable than opportunity alone, then I could change capitalism. So I set about doing this, not to prove to the world, but prove to myself, because I was reconciling this conflict that I had inside myself. So I and my business partner, Pat Calhoun, spent the next 28 years engaged in demonstrating that right livelihood was a far more attractive profit model, but more importantly for us, it was a model of virtue, that there was a lot of fulfillment and reward that was inherent in following this path that you didn't see in the alternative paths.
So it sounds like doing business this way with the foundation of right livelihood really is an internal process, meaning the individual really has to be quite self-aware of values and what's important to them in life. Or how do you suggest, like, what is that process? What do people need to do to do business this way?
It certainly is rooted in belief. It is certainly rooted in conviction. That obviously is very personal. No one's going to give you a belief system. It has to resonate with you as truth, as meaningful, as purposeful for the individual life. So a lot of it has to do with not self-reflection in the meditative sense, although that wouldn't hurt, but self-awareness of what are your values, what do you hold high, what are you looking for that will make you greater than you are. And we all focus on livelihood as a necessary evil, if you will. I'm just going to get a job and got to pay my bills. The fact of the matter is that leaves you sometimes compromised and often unfulfilled in, I'm not happy. Well, if you're chasing a true belief, if you're chasing a true conviction that is the root of your passion for your livelihood, your outcome will be very, very different. It doesn't even mean that success, your happiness is dependent upon success. Your happiness is actually dependent upon fulfillment. So to answer your question, finding those things that you have interest in, that you have belief in, will help give you the conviction with which to drive forward, out of which all of the passion and energy and excitement arise.
So a practical question I have, and something I encounter in my own business as well, is choosing collaborative partners and employees, etc. When you are a values-driven company and a values-driven leader, how do you pick your collaborators?
I'm going to differentiate partners from associates.
Yeah.
And partners have to be in alignment. Otherwise, you have a philosophical disconnect at the top. So in my case, I had great fortune because, good fortune, that Pat was fully committed as a seeker and understood and was trained in the concept as well as I. As far as associates and people that you bring into your employ or a collaboration with, I never looked to qualify people. I looked to demonstrate principles to them. If they weren't in alignment with our principles by their actions, our relationship wasn't that long. So it's very easy to see discord by action, much more so than just sitting and talking about it. So the differentiation would have been at the partner level. Everybody has to be in alignment. Below that, you're actually leading and teaching.
So, I think your own personal journey is just so fascinating, and so you chose.
I've enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So you chose the soy, at a time where soy was not very known, at least not in the United States.
No.
Where did your passion fit in with soy, and how did it become soy?
I was thinking about a concept today coming over here. It's called dependent origination, and it's a Buddhist concept. But dependent origination will show you the stream of logic from which something will spring, something goes forward. For me, I became committed to the principles of right livelihood in the forest around the cave that I've described earlier. At that point, I didn't have a product, I didn't have a mission, I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have a specific purpose. I came back to the United States and I reflected on an experience that I had in Asia with a gentleman who was probably in his late 30s, who was no more intellectually mature than probably a 10-year-old. And on inquiry, I found out that the diet in this area was protein deprived. And protein deprivation at an early age will retard the development of the brain. So if you go back and look at the principles of right livelihood, I'm looking for a product that will solve a problem that's a positive contribution to society. I have had since childhood a passion for gardening and food. So I was able to align my personal interests and passions with a product that was beneficial and that was clearly futuristic in the sense that nobody was consuming soy in the West at that time, but the population explosion on the planet, the exhaustion of resources, the inefficiency of raising animal product, all indicated that there was a trend moving towards plant-based protein. I sort of evaluated, I came back with a very specific goal of demonstrating right livelihood, but no understanding of the product, the mechanism, or any of the particulars. So thinking deeply about this, I realized that as a businessman, there was a huge future opportunity. Plant protein was going to feed the world, and I was convinced it was going to be in 3 years. And that didn't happen. Yeah. Still hasn't. That's 40 years later. Yeah. But I did find that soy met all of my criteria. So I was living in an ashram at that time in the United States, and I got into some very deep, long-term meditation retreat. Went on for 76 days of 14, 16 hours a day of sitting. And you do that much sitting, you don't sleep. Matter of fact, you don't do anything else. Your body is totally rested. And so I was getting up sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning fully rested and ready and sitting in the hall. And I decided that I was going to feed the camp tofu. And I was going to spend from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock in the morning making tofu, and then I'd just join the rest of the group when the normal hours began, and the meditation during the rest of the day. So I went to the management and asked them if I could make tofu, and they said, sure. They got me soybeans and everything, and I trained myself on how to make it out of 10 Talents cookbook. And then I wasted the next probably 35 days on the pillow dreaming up a business and naming it, and
you came up with a name there too.
everything. Total clear vision of exactly what I wanted to do, and within a month after that course, I had opened a small tofu shop in Boulder called the Cow of China. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, the most hated food in the United States at that time.
The tofu was at that time?
More so than liver, and number 2 was yogurt. Wow. Right. So that's how I introduced myself. I'm Steve, and I make the most hated food in America. Can you guess what it is?
That is.
Yeah.
But I mean, it certainly became an immense success. So people, I know that tofu is a little, love-hate food also today. Especially with the GMO, a lot of soy is genetically modified. So
Over 90%.
yeah.
That still leaves 10% that isn't.
Yeah.
And if you realize that, I'm not sure if it's still today, we may be vying with Brazil or China, but we were the largest soy processor in the world. Only 2% of our entire crop ever made it to human food. 2%. All of it's used for animal feed, and the ratio is 7 to 1. Take 7 pounds of vegetable protein to produce 1 pound of animal protein. That was the stat at that time. I presume it to be the same now. So total inefficiency. Soy has come under an enormous amount of criticism for a lot of things, whether it's the phytoestrogens or the GMO. But the reality is that soy has been consumed on this planet for over 2,000 years by billions of people in Asia, and none of the things that it's being criticized for have ever shown up as being a societal concern. And the GMO issue, we used certified organic soy. That's the only thing we ever used, and we never had any problem getting any. So I don't know where the discrediting of soy really came from. I do know that when I left the industry, and probably a few others, the champions of that voice left, and other things took its place. It will come back. It will have its day because it's the most widely raised complete amino acid profile protein on the planet, outside of, obviously, for plant protein, maybe spirulina, maybe hemp are up there. But soy's global. So I chose soy because it fit all the criteria of solving a problem, meeting my definition of nonviolence, good give back, and it was on trend. It was on trend as a business.
Yeah. Well, you were very visionary at your time, for sure.
I seem to be a little ahead of it.
I
Only
think
by
so
a
too.
decade or
I don't
two.
know if it was on trend. You picked the trend before it was a trend, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess. I think I did that with probiotics on round 2. But we'll see.
Yeah, that would be interesting to follow that journey. So I know that you have talked about the principles of livelihood, and you use the metaphor of a seed when you talk about this process and the root. It's in a tree. Would you mind maybe sharing some of that so we can understand?
Yeah, the metaphor is specific for business because it won't apply outside that. So I don't want it to be a blanket statement.
Yeah.
Bottom line, if you envision a tree in fruit, top to bottom, and by bottom I mean below the surface of the earth into its root structure. So you really have a two-ended image. On the top is fruit, foliage, at the upper canopy, the trunk, and then down into the root. I would describe the fruit as the product. That is the service, the product that you engage in. That is the output of the tree. And the canopy of the tree is the administrative team and resources that are necessary with which to support it. It's what the public sees. It's the face of the business, sales, marketing, accounting, all of that. Absolutely essential and right up front in the consumer awareness. Below the canopy of the tree is the trunk. I would consider the trunk to be the operations. That's where all of the energy, of the nutrient is transferred up and out through the ends of the foliage and the flower and into creation of the fruit. Operations is the heart of a business to me. There is only one place in a business that money is made, and that is in operations. Everyone else is a line expense against it. I don't care who you are and what you're doing, you're spending what operations makes. So to me, operations is the heart of that. But operations is dependent upon its supply chain. So below the trunk of the tree is the root. And the root is where all of the nutrients are gathered. They're where all of the water, or most of the water, comes from. In our metaphor, the root is the philosophy or the founding principles or the belief system of what we are engaged in. And if you have a deep root of conviction about your product, about your service, about the virtue of it, then you're feeding everything above it. Now, all of this started from a seed. And the seed will be the commitment or the embracing of right livelihood and the product, service that one has chosen. The seed has no choice other than to become the fruit at the top of that tree. It can't switch in midstream. It can't be something else. It can't distract itself. So whatever we in business plant as a seed by conviction and belief will be the outcome of that growth. You can weather a storm that'll snap the top of the tree off, and the energy that's come from that seed through the root will throw up new shoots, and you'll still get the same tree. You won't get the same growth, obviously, but you're still going to get the same output. If you cut down and destroy the root, compromise the root, in other words, compromise your beliefs, compromise your principles, you will not have the same tree. You will basically destroy the essence of the seed. So the metaphor to me is that at the deepest part is a seed rooted in conviction and belief that sprouts, has to lift 20 times or more its weight in dirt just to get to the light. I suppose that we are somewhat akin to that in the startup phases and all the difficulties that we're faced with. That to me is Right Livelihood's greatest value, is stabilizing the tree against all attacks, if you will, or adverse circumstances, or unexpected situations. If you stay true to the root, stay true to the seed, and weather it, you will get the fruit that you're after. Does not mean it's an easy path. Does not make it any more Um, it does not facilitate, other than internally, how you're going about making your livelihood. Ultimately, there is somewhat, esoterically speaking, of a halo that surrounds a business that has a positive culture, a positive trunk, a positive root, and a positive fruit that's influencing society. That halo is your authenticity, because you're resonating all the way from the root, all the way up through it. That leads to brand loyalty. Brand loyalty in this day and age is dependent not so much on the cheapness of the product, but the authenticity of the product and the culture. As time goes forward, that will become the key differentiator, because in the competitive arena, in the technological era that we live in, exposure and transparency to new products and new services is almost moment to moment to moment. Mm-hmm. So only those that are consistent and true and authentic will be able to stay that long course and garner the brand loyalty that everybody's looking for.
Well, what I have noticed is that there's definitely more and more people doing business this way. But I also see that there's so many businesses still and leaders, that are not choosing to do business in terms of right livelihood or conscious capitalist principles. Do you think that we will see a tipping point at some point, or is it?
Well, I think that the in vogue thing to do is to bolt on what we call consciousness, social benefit. To me, that's an add-on and not going to accomplish what everybody thinks it's going to accomplish. I think that it is a step in the right direction. There's certainly benefits to it. It's better doing this than just doing blind capitalism. But just giving back part of your profits does not qualify you for right livelihood if you happen to be making bombs. Okay, I've exaggerated.
Yeah, I get it.
But if you can follow that all the way back, the tipping point will come when the conviction of personal belief in what people are doing, and then the demonstration of that occurs across our culture. Then we'll have more and more of what I'm going to personally term as right livelihood. Right now, we have an awakening, a consciousness awakening, and better to have that than not. I'd like to see it go deeper so that young entrepreneurs, right from the beginning, are designing their businesses, their efforts, of their life around a livelihood that has deep-rooted purpose, conviction. The rest of it, if you're consistent with it, you're going to produce the fruit that you think you're going to produce. If it's a bolt-on of consciousness, then you're going to vary that. In 5 years, it'll be some other demonstration. In 10 years, it'll be some other demonstration because you're attempting to be a good guy. This has nothing to do with being a good guy. It has to do with aligning with a harmony that leads to a particular, very predictable result. And that is, I'm fulfilled, proud, and full of integrity with how I make my living. Period.
So, we talked about that the millennial generation that's growing up, and they have some belief systems built into their very being that our generation doesn't seem to have in the same way. They don't believe in the same advertising false messages, etc. You had an interesting thought you shared with me that you think that maybe the millennial generation can be the driving force that reaches the...
I would venture to say, up to current, the millennials are probably the most jaded age group yet. And I don't mean that as a negative on them. I think that they have been raised in an era where marketing is effectively camouflage lying. The best, the most, the greatest, the only, the superlatives across the board. My age group was hoodwinked. Advertising was believed. And that went on until everybody was making the same statements and nobody was living up to anything. And all of a sudden you have an empty world.
Yeah.
And the millennials are raised in this going, I don't believe anything. I don't believe a thing. Now, in the business side of me, that means that every day somebody old dies, one of the major brands is losing market share because the young ones aren't coming towards it. And the older crowd bought into household brands 40 years ago, 50 years ago. They're still with those brands out of habit. Their children aren't, their children's children aren't. And that the millennials now are threatening by their avoidance of buying these major brands. They're threatening the stability of the major brands. Well, major brands are the household brands that everybody sees in the refrigerators and the cupboards all the time, are losing not only market share but gross revenue to a small extent. The millennials are looking for something they believe is positive, that they can believe in, because we're in an artificial world. That's the perception that I think they have. So authenticity, consistency with your root, consistency with your belief system, and by that I mean your actions, your culture, your product, your advertising, your social contributions are all consistent with in the same vein. Then we're back to the metaphor of the tree. That's an authenticity that will have a halo. That's the company that will go forward and actually resonate with the next round of consumers. Keep in mind that millennials will soon have children. So you're really talking to two generations of consumers, not one generation of consumers. So I think that the emergence of the new brands will center around their authenticity. And authenticity, by definition, is consistency with your root, with your beliefs.
So it really sounds like the first step is get to know yourself before you can really be a right livelihood leader. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, except I'll qualify that.
Okay.
You already know yourself. You don't need to go very far.
Okay.
There's no studying. You already know the answers. The same way every other human on the planet knows what they believe in, what the truth is, what real value is to them. Now, whether they adhere to that is volitional choice. Whether they're distracted may be the strength of their will. I don't think it takes an awful lot of philosophical, esoteric investigation to understand who you are or what you believe in. I think every person out there, if given the opportunity, can tell you what they believe in.
Yeah. So it's following those beliefs.
Following what you already know.
Yeah.
Yep. And adhering to that.
Yeah.
There's nothing to discover.
Yeah.
That's. We are part of nature, and inherent in nature is balance, and we are part of it. I can't separate ourselves from that. That doesn't make any sense, does it? It's silly. We are influenced by the environment. We're influenced by a very sophisticated mind. But the fact of the matter is, if you just listen to yourself, what you already know, the directives are already there. Right down to the interests. If you stop and think about it, before you were influenced as a teenager, and by that, in the 12 to 15-year-old range, you begin becoming aware that people are thinking things about you. So you change. You modify your behavior, you modify your clothing, you modify your looks. But prior to that, you don't give two hoots. And you are just a coming-of-age human being, say from 7 till 12. If you think about what you did then, as a child, that came straight from you. That came straight out of the human being. What did you like? There's your passion. There is your interest. Now couple that with your belief in values, in character values and action values, and run those two together. What's the old saying? If you find something you love, you'll never work another day in your life. Okay, where's the root of that? It's right where we're talking, in my estimation.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for asking.